The cabin lights dimmed as the late-night flight from Houston to Chicago settled into uneasy silence. Except at seat 18C. Emily Carter rocked her twins, Noah and Caleb, her arms aching from their constant squirming. One cried, then the other, and soon their voices rose together, sharp and relentless. A chorus of need she could not quiet. Passengers shifted in their seats. A man 2 rows ahead rubbed his temples. Someone sighed loudly. Emily whispered desperate apologies. Though her throat was raw, her body hollowed by 3 nights of little sleep. Her hands trembled as she held a bottle near Caleb's mouth. He pushed it away. Noah wailed louder. Emily's vision blurred. She pressed her forehead briefly to the cool window, rain streaking across the glass like her own exhaustion. She thought of the week before, of the hurried packing, the old suitcase snapping shut, her husband's voice echoing in the walls she had left behind. Charm turned menace. Love turned cage. She had carried only what she could: bottles, diapers, the twins, and the will to escape. Now, at 30,000 feet, survival felt both too close and impossibly far. Emily adjusted Noah higher against her shoulder, whispering broken lullabies. Her arms trembled from the weight. Her voice rasped from nights without sleep. Caleb whimpered in her lap, small fists beating the air. A passenger sighed loudly. Another pressed the call button. The sound of disapproval stung more than the crying itself. A flight attendant approached with a pinched smile. "Ma'am, could you?" "I'm trying," Emily whispered, eyes wet. "I'm trying everything." The attendant's smile slipped. She moved on, but the air around Emily felt heavier, filled with judgment. Her thoughts blurred. Just a week ago, she'd been in the kitchen of her house. Her husband's voice low and sharp, his hand closing around her wrist. She remembered the sound of the suitcase snapping shut, the twins pressed against her as she fled. She hadn't looked back. Now, 30,000 feet above the dark fields of Texas, she felt cornered again. No doors, no escape, just exhaustion tightening like a fist around her chest. And then a voice came, calm, quiet. "Would you like me to help?" Emily turned. Beside her stood a man in his 40s, tall but ordinary in a plaid shirt, no trace of impatience in his eyes. He held out his arms, steady, not insistent. Her instinct screamed no. Strangers were dangerous. But Noah shrieked louder, his tiny body rigid, and Emily's arms ached as if they might drop him. She nodded. The man gathered Noah carefully, settling him against his chest. To Emily's shock, the crying slowed, then stopped. The baby sighed, small body loosening into rest. The cabin shifted, tension dissolving like air released from a valve. Passengers sank back into their seats. A few even smiled. Emily stared, almost in disbelief. "How?" The man's voice was low. "Name's David. I've held a lot of babies in my time. They just need calm." Her own breathing slowed, as if his steadiness reached her, too. She leaned back, still rocking Caleb. Her eyelids stung heavy. For the first time in days, she let them close. Sleep claimed her before she could resist. When she woke, the cabin was dim, engines humming steady. Her head had slipped sideways, resting against David's shoulder. Noah was still in his arms, asleep. Emily straightened quickly, her cheeks hot. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "Don't apologize," David said gently. "You needed rest." He reached into his pocket and handed her a card. Simple design, navy letters pressed into white. The Hale Foundation. Emily froze. She knew the name. a national foundation that built shelters, funded lawyers for women like her, gave families a second chance. Her eyes lifted to him in disbelief. David Hale, the founder, and he was here, in plaid, holding her child as if he'd known him forever. The plane touched down in Chicago past midnight. Rain streaked the windows as passengers shuffled out, tugging bags, eager to leave. Emily moved slower, the twins heavy in her arms, her old suitcase dragging behind like an anchor. She clutched the business card in her pocket but told herself it meant nothing. People like David Hale lived in another world. He had probably given it out 1,000 times, a polite gesture. She wouldn't see him again. The shelter was only 3 bus stops away. She followed the dim streetlights, the twins bundled against the cold, her suitcase wheels rattling over cracked pavement. When she reached the small brick building, a handwritten sign was taped to the door. At capacity. No vacancies. Her throat tightened. She knocked anyway. A tired woman in a cardigan cracked the door. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "We're full. Try the station downtown. Sometimes the benches are warmer than the street." Emily nodded, unable to speak. She turned back into the drizzle, clutching her boys tighter. At Union Station, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the floor damp and cold. She lowered herself onto a bench, laying Caleb across her lap while Noah nestled against her chest. Their tiny breaths fogged her jacket. She pulled the suitcase closer, a shield against the emptiness around them. She whispered, "It's just one night, just one." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Headlights cut across the glass doors. A black SUV slowed at the curb. For a moment Emily froze, every muscle braced, until the driver's door opened. David stepped out, rain speckling his shirt. He raised a hand as if not to startle her. "I wasn't following you," he said. His voice was steady, quiet. "But I couldn't leave things like this." Emily clutched her sons closer. "Why are you here?" "Because no mother should be on a station bench with 2 babies." He gestured toward the SUV. "The foundation has temporary apartments. One's ready tonight. Just a bed, formula, a safe place to breathe." Her throat closed. Pride urged her to refuse. Fear warned her not to trust. But when Noah stirred, whimpering, she felt the last of her resistance break. She nodded once. Inside the SUV, warmth wrapped around them. Caleb fell asleep instantly. Emily pressed her palm to the fogged window, watching the city blur past, wondering how a stranger had become her only lifeline. The apartment was small, but to Emily it felt enormous. A single room, clean sheets, a crib waiting against the wall. On the table, a basket of formula, diapers, and a folded note. "Welcome. You're safe here." She stood there a long moment, staring, afraid it might vanish if she blinked. Then she laid the twins in the crib. They shifted, sighed, and slept. Silence, deep and unfamiliar, wrapped around her. For the first time in months, she breathed without fear. Morning brought sunlight through thin curtains and a gentle knock. A woman named Grace entered, middle-aged, calm, eyes full of quiet understanding. She carried folders and fresh groceries. "No rules but rest," she said. "We'll help with doctors, paperwork, whatever you need. You're not alone anymore." Emily nodded, unable to speak. Days passed. She learned again what routine felt like. Meals at a table, baths without rushing, bottles warmed without panic. Noah and Caleb began to smile again, their cries softening into playful sounds. Each morning Grace knocked, Each evening the apartment remained, still hers. Emily dared to believe, but shadows lingered. She knew her husband would search. He had always known how to make people believe him. His charm was his weapon, and courts often listened to men who wore pressed shirts and steady smiles. Every time her phone buzzed, her chest tightened. At last she turned it off. One gray afternoon, Emily sat in a cafe across from the foundation's office. Caleb slept in the stroller. Noah played with the strap of her bag. The clink of cups and hiss of the espresso machine blurred into background comfort, until a shadow fell across her table. Her husband, the same smile sharp at the edges, the same voice soft and cutting. "Emily," he said, sliding into the chair across from her like nothing had changed. "Do you know what people will think when they hear you ran? Courts favor fathers, and I look respectable." Her hands trembled under the table. Words tangled in her throat. Then a steady hand touched the back of her chair. "She isn't alone anymore," David said. He stood behind her, quiet strength in his voice. Her husband's smile faltered, twisting into something harder. "And you are someone who knows what you've done," David answered evenly. "And someone who won't let it happen again." The cafe grew hushed. Emily stared at her husband, watched the shift of his face. Charm cracking into anger, anger into calculation. He rose sharply, muttered something she didn't catch, and walked out. Silence stretched. Emily's hands still shook when David sat down across from her. He didn't crowd her, didn't speak right away. He simply waited until her breathing eased. Finally, her voice broke through. "He'll never stop." David leaned forward, his gaze steady as stone. "Then neither will we. The foundation has lawyers, investigators. But more than that, you have us. You don't have to fight him alone." Tears welled. She pressed a hand to her mouth, ashamed of the sob that escaped. David said nothing, only sat with her until the storm inside her calmed. That night she returned to the apartment. The city hummed outside, no longer menacing but alive. She opened her old suitcase, unfolded the last baby clothes, and placed a worn photograph of her mother on the table beneath the window. In the reflection on the glass, she no longer saw a woman disappearing. She saw someone still standing, someone who might endure. The first letter from the court arrived folded in a plain envelope. Emily almost didn't open it. She knew before she saw the words. Her husband was filing for custody. The paper blurred in her hands. His claims were neat, typed with precision. That she was unstable, that she had fled irrationally, that he could provide a better life. Reading the lies, Emily felt her chest close like a vice. He had always known how to twist truth into his weapon. When she brought the letter to the foundation office, Grace was already waiting with a folder. "We expected this," she said calmly. "He'll try to paint himself as a saint. That's why we've gathered records, hospital reports, testimony from neighbors, everything he wanted buried. You're not going to face this alone." Emily sat in the quiet office, Noah in her lap, Caleb in a bassinet nearby. For the first time, she let herself lean on the words. Not alone. The hearings began in a tall building of glass and steel. The courtroom was cold, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Her husband entered in a tailored suit, smiling as if this were another business deal he had already won. When he glanced at her, his eyes glinted. "See, I always control the story." But then David walked in, followed by two lawyers from the foundation. They carried thick binders, their voices calm, deliberate. Emily wasn't just a frightened mother anymore. She was represented, seen, believed. During testimony, her husband spoke with charm polished smooth by years of practice. He spoke of stability, of financial security, of being the responsible parent. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had perfected the art of performance. Emily thought she would crumble when her turn came, the weight of every gaze pressed against her chest. But then she looked down at Noah tugging gently at her sleeve, Caleb blinking up from his stroller, and her voice found its edge. She spoke of nights when his anger filled the house, of threats whispered so no one else would hear, of how she had learned to move silently, always bracing. Her words shook, but she didn't stop. The lawyers backed her with evidence. Medical records of bruises, neighbors' statements about shouting, phone records showing late-night calls to hotlines she never admitted to making. Piece by piece, the image of his control cracked. Her husband's smile thinned. He leaned back, fingers tapping against the table. The performance was faltering. Weeks stretched into months. Hearings postponed, motions filed. Each time Emily walked into the courtroom, she felt the tremor in her knees. Each time she left, she saw David waiting at the doors. He never pushed advice, never gave empty encouragement. He simply walked beside her, carrying silence that felt like strength. One evening, after yet another grueling session, she found him outside the courthouse, rain streaking the steps. She stopped beside him, the twins bundled against her chest. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked, her voice low, not accusing, only tired. David looked at her, rain in his hair, expression steady. "Because I've seen too many women stand in these halls alone. And because I promised myself I wouldn't look away again." Emily held his gaze. For a moment, the noise of the city faded. She felt the truth in his words settle inside her like an anchor. At night, back in the small apartment, she tucked the twins into bed and sat by the window. The city glowed below, restless and alive. For the first time, she didn't feel like a fugitive. She felt like someone fighting for a life worth keeping. And she wasn't fighting alone. The last hearing came with spring rain. Emily climbed the courthouse steps, twins bundled against her chest. David walked beside her, steady as always, his silence more comforting than words. Inside, her husband was already waiting. His suit was perfect, his smile smooth. To anyone else, he looked like security itself. To Emily, he looked like the cage she had escaped. His lawyer spoke first. Words like stability and financial security echoed through the room. Emily was painted as reckless, unstable, incapable of providing. Every sentence was sharpened to cut her down. Her pulse hammered, but the foundation's lawyers rose calmly, laying down evidence piece by piece. Hospital records, police notes, testimonies from neighbors who had heard shouting through the walls. The image of respectability began to fracture. Then a colleague of his stepped forward. Her voice shook, but she told the court about late nights when he returned seething, muttering about control. She had once seen bruises on Emily's wrist. She had stayed silent then. She wasn't silent now. Her husband's mask slipped. He whispered harshly to his lawyer, jaw tight. Another neighbor testified, recalling how Emily left the house often at night, returning only when the shouting stopped. By the time Emily was called, her legs trembled. She rose anyway, looking at her sons sleeping in their stroller. "I left," she said quietly, "because staying would have broken me, and if I broke, they would break too. I didn't steal them from their father. I carried them toward life." The room was still. Her husband snapped, "Lies! His voice rang too sharp, too loud. For the first time, the charm was gone. The judge leaned back, thoughtful. Then, with calm finality, she ruled. Full custody to Emily, visitation suspended, protective measures enforced. Emily sat down hard, pressing a hand to her mouth. Tears blurred her vision. Across the aisle, her husband slammed the table, but no one looked at him now. Outside, the rain had stopped. The courthouse steps glistened, washed clean. Emily held her children close, the air cool and new around her. David stood beside her, rain in his hair, a faint smile touching his face. "You did it." Emily shook her head. "We did." For the first time, she believed it. That evening, back in the apartment, she placed the twins in their crib and sat by the window. The city stretched wide and restless, but no longer threatening. For the first time, it felt like a place where she might build a life. And this time, she wasn't facing it alone. 6 months later, Chicago no longer felt like a city of strangers. Emily pushed a stroller through the lobby of the Hale Foundation, her twins giggling at the bright fish tank near reception. The building smelled faintly of coffee and paper, humming with the quiet energy of lives being rebuilt. She now worked here part-time, helping other mothers find resources, filling out forms she once signed with trembling hands. Each story she touched reminded her of nights on a station bench, of doors closed, of how easily the world could erase a person. She had learned to meet those women's eyes and say the words she once longed to hear. "You're not alone." Life was still hard. Money tight, hours long, exhaustion constant. But it was hers, chosen, no longer dictated by fear. The twins had grown stronger, their laughter filling the small apartment the foundation still provided. Some evenings she caught herself smiling for no reason at all, surprised at the sound of it. One late afternoon, the sun poured gold across the city, spilling into David's office. He stood by the window, jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up. The skyline glimmered behind him. "You wanted to see me?" Emily asked softly, stepping in. He turned, a rare ease in his expression. "I never told you why I stayed that night at the cafe," he said. "It wasn't pity. I saw strength in you, more than you could see yourself." Emily's breath caught. She looked down at her hands, then at him. His words settled like something long overdue, not praise, but recognition. "I used to feel invisible," she admitted, "like I was just surviving, not living. Now, I don't know what comes next, but I finally feel like I can choose." David smiled, a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I ever hoped for." The room fell into gentle silence. Outside, the city pulsed with noise, but inside there was only stillness, warm and steady. Emily left the office with the twins, the late sun wrapping them in light. She walked into the street, the stroller wheels rattling over the sidewalk. For the first time, she didn't look back. The past was behind her, the future hers to build.